The sun burned low over the plains of eastern Wyoming, casting long shadows across a wagon that hadn't moved in 2 days. Inside it, 7 children sat in silence. Dust covered their faces. Their clothes were mismatched, stitched, and restitched by small, trembling hands. Their eyes, though young, had seen too much. The eldest was a girl no older than 16. Her name, at least the one she'd clung to, was June. She'd stopped using her last name because it hurt too much to speak it. It had been her father's, and her father had died right in front of them just 3 days earlier, under the blistering sun, too proud to ask for water. He'd whispered his last breath into June's ear. "Take care of them. Don't let them get split up." He'd been right to worry. Orphans were taken, scattered like seeds in the wind. No one took 7. June sat on the wagon's wooden tongue, boots dangling, cradling her youngest sibling, still in diapers, quiet from hunger. She looked out over the parched fields and thought of walking again. But where? She had no idea. Miles away, Thomas Callahan finished hammering a board into the south fence of his ranch. 41, quiet and built like a mountain, he lived alone ever since the war and the years that came after. He was a man with scars he didn't speak about, some across his skin, others deeper. His ranch was modest but sound, running cattle through a land that gave more dust than grass some years. He didn't smile often, but when he did, the horses came closer. He trusted animals more than most men, and he never imagined a family in his life again. Until the wind shifted. It was dusk when he saw them, figures small as shadows moving along the ridge. He thought at first it was wild dogs or coyotes, but when one figure stumbled and another reached out to catch them, he knew those were children. He saddled his horse without thinking. He'd been raised to look the other way when it wasn't his business. But something in the way that tallest figure stood between the others, even from a distance, pulled at something in his chest he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Compassion, or maybe memory. He found them near the broken wagon, barely upright, faces pale with dust and fear. The girl stood between him and the others, eyes like a frightened fox, ready to run but ready to fight too. "You ain't taken us," she said. Her voice was cracked but steady. He didn't answer for a moment. Then, gently, he dismounted. "I ain't here to take anyone," he said. "I'm Thomas Callahan. You look like you could use a place to sit, and some water." No one moved. The wind whistled. "I ain't here to hurt you," he added, "or split you up. I was just fixin' fence when I saw you." The smallest child began to cry. The middle one reached out for the baby in June's arms, and something in the girl's eyes gave in, just slightly. Not trust, not yet, but hope. That night they slept in the barn. Clean water, biscuits from scratch, blankets from an old chest in the attic. June stayed awake all night, sitting near the hayloft ladder, eyes fixed on the door. And Thomas? He sat on his porch with his rifle across his lap, watching the stars. He didn't know what would come next, but deep down, something in him had already shifted. The sun cracked over the horizon like an egg on a skillet, spilling orange light across the plains. The Callahan Ranch stirred quietly. Birds picked at the yard. The wind ran soft over the dry fields, and in the barn, 7 children slept like they'd never slept before, in safety. Except June. She hadn't slept a wink. She sat with her back against a wooden post, eyes rimmed red but open, clutching her little brother tight against her chest. Even as hay dust filled her nose and her legs cramped from sitting too long, she refused to close her eyes. She didn't know this man, Thomas Callahan, and while he had offered food, water, and shelter, kindness like that usually came with a price. Her whole life had taught her one thing: people don't give without wanting something back. Thomas poured 2 mugs of coffee that morning, one for himself and one for the porch post across from him. It was a quiet ritual he used to share with someone. Now the other cup just sat there out of habit. Until today. He heard small footsteps on gravel and looked up. June stood there, arms folded across her chest, baby still in tow. Her face was unreadable, tough but too thin, too tired. "You planning on keeping us in your barn forever?" she asked. Thomas blinked. "That's up to you." June frowned. "We don't need charity." "No," he agreed. "You need a roof, water, and time to figure what comes next." June studied him. "Why are you doing this?" Thomas hesitated. He could have told her about the way his late wife always wanted children, or the boy they lost before he even had a name, or the years he spent trying not to feel anything. Instead, he said simply, "Because I saw 7 kids with nothing but each other, and I couldn't ride on past." By the end of the day, the barn became more than a stopover. Blankets were shaken out. A corner was swept. June insisted on working for the food. They all did. The second oldest, Ruthie, helped gather eggs and even coaxed a smile out of the hens. The twins, Samuel and Susie, carried water pails, half spilling it the whole way, but proud nonetheless. Little Matthew was too young to do much, but he followed close, mimicking Thomas's stride. The baby, Nate, mostly slept, tucked tight in June's shawl, and Ellie, just 5, stayed quiet, but always kept a hand on one of her siblings, like she was the glue between their fragile edges. They worked like they were used to fending for themselves. They never asked for more than what was given. They never complained. That evening, Thomas sat with June at the porch steps. She still didn't fully trust him, but something was changing in her voice, softer, if only slightly. "You're not going to turn us into the authorities?" she asked. He shook his head. "You runnin'?" "No, just afraid they'll split us up." Thomas nodded. He'd seen it before. Families torn like worn cloth by rules that didn't understand love. "I won't let that happen," he said quietly. June didn't answer, but she glanced at him long enough for him to see something flicker across her face. Not trust, not yet, but maybe belief. Inside the barn that night, Ruthie whispered to June in the dark, "Is he gonna keep us?" June didn't know what to say, but she looked down at Nate sleeping in her arms and whispered back, "I think he might not send us away." Out on the porch, Thomas sat with the coffee mug meant for someone else. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone anymore. The next morning, June woke to a smell she hadn't known in months. Fresh cornbread baking from the ranch kitchen. She bolted upright in the barn loft, startled. Ruthie was already awake, brushing Ellie's hair with her fingers. Samuel and Susie were building some lopsided fort from hay bales, and even baby Nate had stopped fussing. For the first time in what felt like forever, The air didn't feel like danger. But that made her nervous. Nothing ever stayed good for long. She left Ruthie in charge and walked across the yard. The kitchen door was open, screen flapping gently. Thomas stood by the stove, flipping cornbread onto a plate with the awkward stiffness of a man who'd learned to cook only because he had to. He didn't turn when she stepped in. "I figured kids that small can't run on just stew," he said. "Cornmeal's a bit old, but I reckon it'll hold. You don't have to keep feeding us." "I know," he replied, setting the plate down, "but I'm doing it anyway." June didn't sit, but she didn't leave either. "You got someone coming for us?" she asked, testing him. Thomas turned then, meeting her gaze. "Only if you send word." Later that day, Thomas took the kids to the pasture and let them help feed the cows. The older ones were hesitant at first, but soon Samuel was laughing at a calf licking his arm, and Susie squealed as the hay tickled her face. Thomas watched them with a quiet ache growing in his chest. They were like seeds that had landed in dry soil, still alive, still fighting for sunlight. He'd told himself this was temporary, that maybe he'd help them rest a few days before they moved on. But deep down, something had shifted. That evening, June sat on the porch again, staring out at the golden light across the prairie. Her hands were rough, scratched, strong from too many burdens. "You ever had kids?" she asked suddenly. Thomas didn't answer at first. Then, "Had a son, long time ago, didn't make it past his first winter." "I'm sorry." He nodded, quiet. "And your wife?" "Gone. Fever took her before the war did." June didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I didn't mean to sound ungrateful. I'm just used to people wanting something." "I get it. You don't look like you got a reason to help us." "I didn't till I saw you." Her eyes snapped up to his, and for a split second she let the weight drop, just enough for the pain to show. "They were going to take us to town, sell the wagon, maybe separate us. Pa was too sick to stop it." Thomas clenched his jaw. "Ain't gonna happen now." That night, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Rain was a promise that rarely kept its word in that part of Wyoming. Inside the barn, June pulled her siblings close, wrapping them in every blanket Thomas had found. She looked down at Nate, who was teething and whimpering. And she whispered, "You're safe now." And for the first time in weeks, she believed it. Out on the porch, Thomas sat beneath a lantern's glow, his boots muddy from fence repairs and hands worn raw from hauling hay. But his heart felt fuller than it had in years. He didn't know if he was building a new family yet. He just knew he couldn't let them go. The rain came before dawn. It wasn't much, just a soft pattering on the barn roof and a coolness in the air that made the dust settle. But to June, it sounded like hope. Real, quiet hope. The kind you don't dare speak aloud in case it vanishes. She stood at the edge of the open barn door, barefoot in the damp soil, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Behind her, the younger children still slept, tangled in a nest of blankets, hay, and each other. She was about to step back inside when she heard a voice behind her. "You ever seen the land drink like that?" Thomas asked, holding two chipped mugs, one steaming with coffee, the other just hot water. He offered the second to her. June took it, surprised. "I didn't think folks drank hot water." He shrugged. "Ran out of sugar. Figured plain's better than nothing." June cracked the faintest smile. "You got an odd way of thinking, Mr. Callahan." Thomas nodded. Been told that before. They stood in silence for a while, watching the sky lighten. The quiet between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was settling, like the land after a storm. Later that morning, the children were already bouncing off the barn walls with too much energy and not enough space. Thomas made a decision. "Think I've got something they might like," he told June. "You trust me enough to let him follow?" She hesitated. Then, to his quiet satisfaction, she nodded. Out back, beyond the pasture and the creek, was an old shed. Half-fallen, cobwebbed, and forgotten, it once stored tools from the days when Thomas's father ran the place. He opened it with a groan of wood and rust, then pulled out an old wooden wagon, its wheels dry and in need of oil, but otherwise intact. Within an hour, the twins were hanging off the sides. Ellie was perched up front with Ruthie steering the reins, though there was no horse attached, and Matthew declared himself the sheriff of the barnyard. Even Nate giggled as June rocked him nearby. Thomas stood off to the side, arms folded, just watching. "How long you think this'll last?" June asked, sitting beside him. "Long as they want it to. They're happy. They should be." June was quiet a moment. It's been a long time since they were. That afternoon, Thomas fixed the back porch railing with Samuel's help. The boy handed him nails and asked questions, mostly about cattle, horses, and what it was like to live without rules. Thomas smiled at that. "There are rules here. We just write 'em ourselves." That night, after the kids were tucked in, June stood in the doorway of the farmhouse. "You ever think about keeping us?" she asked quietly. Thomas didn't answer right away. He didn't want to spook her with the truth. "Every day since you showed up." June looked down, biting her lip. "They won't be easy," she said. "I wasn't expectin' easy." "They come with stories, baggage." "Don't we all?" She looked up, eyes shining in the lantern light. "You think folks like us can start over?" Thomas nodded. "I think maybe that's the only kind who ever do." And for the first time, she let herself believe it might be true. The next few weeks passed like a slow but steady sunrise, each day a little brighter than the one before. The barn was no longer just a place to sleep. With Thomas's help, June and the kids turned it into something closer to a home. Fresh straw, mended roof patches, a hand-me-down stove from the tool shed that Ruthie learned to cook on with real delight. Thomas never asked them to stay, and June never asked how long they could. But they all felt it, that strange, quiet truth in the air. They were becoming a family. One morning, June sat on the porch shelling peas, while Nate slept in a blanket nearby. She looked up and saw Thomas walking back from the south field, his sleeves rolled up, dirt on his hands and dust in his beard. He looked content, but tired. She stood and walked down to meet him. "You always work that hard?" she asked. He gave her a crooked smile. "Not always, but these cows don't feed themselves." June hesitated, then reached out and took the bucket from him. "You let me help now," she said. "I've been lettin' you." "No, you've been lettin' me feel useful. That's different." Thomas stopped walking, his eyes catching hers. "You are useful, June, more than you know." She looked away then, cheeks pinking in the morning light. No one had ever said that to her, not without asking for something in return. That afternoon, a wagon rolled down the road. A man from town, Harland Finch, known for sniffing around where he didn't belong, stepped off it. Word was already spreading in town. "There's a group of wild orphans living out at Callahan's place." Thomas met him at the gate before he could set foot on the land. "Something I can help you with, Harland?" The man sniffed. "Heard you've been playing guardian. Thought I'd come to see for myself. You know what they say about stray dogs and wild kids. They'll eat you out of house and home if you're not careful." Thomas didn't blink. "You're not here to help," he said plainly. "And if you come back without good reason, I'll assume you're trespassing." Finch scoffed. "You can't hide 'em forever." Thomas tipped his hat. "Ain't hiding 'em, just protecting what's mine." That night, June found out. "You didn't tell me someone came," she said, arms crossed on the porch steps. "I handled it. You don't need to do that for us." "I want to." June was silent, then said quietly, "People don't usually want anything from us but work or silence." Thomas looked at her, really looked. "I want none of that. I want you safe. I want you here." June's throat tightened. She wasn't used to kindness without strings. "We're not easy to keep." "I don't want easy," he replied. "I'm not even sure who I am anymore." Thomas's voice lowered. "Then let's figure it out together." Later, as the sun dipped into orange and gold behind the hills, June sat with her siblings, helping Ellie braid her hair, while Samuel and Susie argued over who could tie the better knot. And from the porch, Thomas watched with quiet eyes and a steady heart. He hadn't saved them. Not really. They were saving each other. The wind shifted that week, cooler, sharper. The cottonwood trees rustled like whispers, warning of the change ahead. Fall was coming, and with it decisions. Thomas had been preparing the ranch for colder months, stacking firewood, checking the root cellar, patching the windows. It was the kind of work he used to do alone. Now he had 6 pairs of feet underfoot, and a 7th toddling just behind. And strangely enough, he missed the noise when it wasn't there. Inside the barn, June stood staring at a wooden crate she hadn't dared open until now. It held everything their father had left: a Bible, some papers, and a folded-up family record, old, yellowed, and signed only with their father's first name. There was no surname, no legal claim, nothing that would bind them to each other in the eyes of the world. She held the paper to her chest. It wasn't much, but it was everything. That night she found Thomas in the kitchen, sorting a pile of books on the table. Ruthie had asked to learn to read properly, and Thomas had gone all the way into Casper for a box of schoolhouse throwaways. "I don't know how long we'll stay," June said softly, standing in the doorway. Thomas didn't look up. "I didn't ask you to." "But I want to," she added, barely a whisper. This time he raised his head. "I don't know what that means yet," she said, voice trembling. "I'm not ready to make promises I can't keep." "You don't have to." "But I don't want to run anymore," she added. Thomas stepped around the table slowly, then stopped right in front of her. "Then stay. One day at a time, that's all I ask." June looked up into eyes steady as a mountain and nodded. Over the next few days, something began to change, not in words, but in rhythm. The children started calling the ranch home. Ruthie helped Thomas cook dinner and told him about her dreams of being a seamstress. Samuel followed him to the barn every morning, determined to learn how to saddle a horse. Ellie began to hum when she brushed the goats. Susie taught Matthew how to whistle, and June started smiling without realizing it. Sometimes just at the wind, sometimes when Thomas wasn't looking. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the children dozed in a blanket heap near the floor, June sat across from Thomas at the kitchen table. She reached into her coat and gently laid the old family record on the table. "It's not legal," she said, "but it's who we are." Thomas looked at the document, then back at her. "You want to keep the name?" he asked. June hesitated. "We never really had one. I think we'd like a new start." Thomas thought for a long moment. "There's room on this land, room in this house, and in my name, if that's ever something you'd want." Her eyes widened. He wasn't proposing. He wasn't rushing. He was offering something far rarer. Belonging. June's voice cracked. "We ain't never belonged anywhere before." "You do now," he said quietly. That night, she held Nate close and whispered words she hadn't said in years. "We're home, little one, for real this time." And out on the porch, under the stars, Thomas leaned back in his chair, a quiet peace settling over him. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a family. The first frost arrived in the middle of the night. Thomas had warned them it was coming, stacked blankets high, sealed the barn walls tighter than ever, even moved Nate's crib into the farmhouse so the baby wouldn't catch the chill. But still, the morning felt like the world had turned brittle overnight. June stood at the porch rail, breath clouding in the crisp air. Her shawl was wrapped tight, but her heart felt wide open. The horizon was pale blue and gold. The cattle stood still like statues in the field, mist curling from their backs. Beside her, Ellie tugged on her sleeve, whispering, "Can we have hot biscuits again?" June smiled and nodded. "I'll ask Ruthie." And Ruthie, who'd never baked before this ranch, was already in the kitchen, flowers streaked across her nose like war paint, proudly mixing with Thomas's guidance. The girl had found her rhythm here. They all had. Thomas took Samuel and Susie with him that day to help bring the last of the firewood down from the back hill. The wagon was heavy, but the kids insisted on pulling their share. "You're not just visiting anymore, are you?" Susie asked from the back of the cart. Thomas smiled slightly. "Nope, don't think I am." "Does that mean we're yours now?" Samuel asked. Thomas stopped walking. He looked back at the boy, freckles on his cheeks, two big boots dragging in the leaves, hope in his eyes too big for his age. "You've always been yours first," Thomas said. "But if you'll have me, then yes. I'd be proud to call you mine." Susie grinned so wide her cheeks turned pink. Samuel didn't say anything. He just kept walking, a little taller now. That evening, June brought in a worn box from the barn, the last one from the wagon her father had left behind. Inside were scraps of fabric, her mother's old sewing kit, and a few letters wrapped in twine. She sat on the living room floor, unraveling them one by one as the fire crackled nearby. Ruthie sat beside her, thumbing through the colorful threads. "You gonna make us something?" Ruthie asked. June stared down at a half-finished quilt top her mother must have started long ago. "Yeah," she said softly, "I think I will." Later that night, Thomas fixed the hinges on the upstairs bedroom door. They were moving into the house gradually now, bit by bit, and the upstairs room, once shut tight for years, was slowly becoming a space filled with laughter and pillow fights. June watched from this doorway as he worked, sleeves rolled to his elbows, every movement careful and slow. "You ever think your house would get this loud again?" she asked with a half-smile. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm glad it did." She stepped in quietly. "They think the world of you. I think the world of them too." She paused. "And what about me?" Thomas straightened, met her gaze. "I think you're the strongest woman I've ever met." June's throat tightened. She wasn't sure why those words hit so deep, but they did. "You saved us," she whispered. "No," he said, stepping closer. "You walked them here. You kept them breathing. I just opened a door." And in the silence that followed, their closeness felt warm. Not like fire, but like something safer, something lasting. Downstairs, Ellie called out, "June, Nate just took 3 steps." June smiled through misty eyes and stepped away. "We'll finish this talk another time," she said gently. Thomas nodded. "I'll be here." And for the first time in her life, June didn't have to doubt if someone meant those words. The first snow arrived in flurries, brushing the plains like whispers from heaven. It didn't stick yet, but it turned the air silver and quiet. The children stood at the windows of the farmhouse, faces pressed to the glass in wonder. They'd seen snow before, but never from inside a warm house. Never like this. Inside the kitchen, Ruthie stirred the pot of stew while June folded the laundry near the stove. Nate sat on the floor beside them, surrounded by wooden spoons and the buttons Ellie had dumped from the sewing box. It was messy, loud, imperfect, and for June, it was perfect. She glanced out the window toward the barn, where Thomas was hitching up the wagon with Samuel and Susie, bouncing around him like puppies. "You're not worried?" Ruthie asked. June blinked. "About what?" "That we'll wake up one day and he'll change his mind." June paused. The question cut through more than she expected. But then she said slowly, "I used to think every good thing would be taken. But Thomas, he doesn't feel like something that leaves." Ruthie stirred quietly, cheeks flushed. "I hope he doesn't," she whispered. That afternoon, Thomas returned from town with news that stirred something deeper. "I asked the judge," he said as June joined him on the porch, bundled in her shawl. "Asked if I could legally take guardianship of all 7 of you." June froze. Thomas held her gaze. He said it'd be a mess of paperwork, questions, proof of parentage, name records. June looked down. "We don't have any of that." "I know, but I'm not giving up." June said nothing for a long time. Then, "Why?" Thomas's voice was steady. "Because I don't just want you here. I want you to have a name you choose, a family that chooses you back. And if I have to fight the law with a shovel and a stack of signatures, I will." Her eyes welled up. "I never asked you for that." "You didn't have to," he said. "You walked in with 6 children and held the whole world on your back. It's my turn to carry some of it." That night, June pulled out the old quilt top again. She began sewing it slowly, piece by piece. Ruthie joined her, then Susie, then Ellie. Each child stitched their own square, scraps from old shirts, faded ribbons, bits of memory sewn together with trembling hands and new beginnings. They didn't call it a quilt. They called it their map. A week later, Thomas cleared out the upstairs room once used for storage. It would be the girls' room. He painted the walls in soft yellow with leftover barn paint. It wasn't perfect, but it glowed in the morning light. He built shelves for books, hung hooks for Ruthie's apron, and nailed a single wooden sign above the door. "Callahan Girls." When June saw it, she covered her mouth with her hand. "You did this for us?" Thomas nodded. "Felt like it was yours anyway." She stepped closer. "You don't know what that name means to us." "I know what it means to me," he said. "It means I'm not alone anymore." That night, while the fire cracked and wind danced outside, the family sat around the table eating stew and fresh bread. Laughter echoed, forks clinked. and for once, no one looked over their shoulder. June reached across the table and laid her hand on Thomas's. It wasn't a promise. It was something stronger, a silent, steady beginning. The snow came hard 2 days later. This time it stuck, thick and white and soft as silence. The ranch turned into a painting, white roofs, sleeping fields, chimney smoke curling into the steel-gray sky. Inside the house, the children buzzed like bees in a jar. Ruthie helped hang wet mittens by the fire. Samuel and Susie took turns telling exaggerated stories of fighting off wild wolves with snowballs. Ellie taught Nate to say snow, and Matthew built towers of canned goods in the kitchen until June gently made him stop before the beans collapsed. And Thomas? He watched from the doorway with a quiet kind of wonder, the kind that comes when you realize life has given you something back, something you didn't even ask for. That evening, June stood at the sink, washing dishes with Thomas beside her drying. It had become a quiet ritual, one of many small routines that now tethered their days together. "Judge Lyman wired back," he said after a pause. "Wants me to come in person to Casper next week." June looked up. "About the papers?" Thomas nodded. "He's asking for statements, witnesses, anything to prove this ain't temporary." June dried her hands on her skirt. "What if they say no? Then I try again, or I fight harder, but I won't walk away." She turned to face him, eyes wide. "You mean it?" "I do." She bit her bottom lip, hesitated, then asked the question that had been echoing in her heart since the day they arrived. "Why us, Thomas? Why me?" He set the towel down and looked her in the eye. "Because I was a house with no people, and you were people with no house." She blinked. "You filled every quiet place in me," he added softly. June couldn't speak for a moment. She only stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, and wrapped her arms around him. Thomas froze, startled, then held her back. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was something even deeper, safe, real, solid. Later that night, June sat with her siblings around the fire as the snow thickened outside. "Do you think we'll get to stay forever?" Ellie asked. June paused. "I don't know what forever looks like," she said gently, "but I know we're not running anymore. That counts for something." Ruthie leaned her head on June's shoulder. "It counts for everything." A week later, Thomas rode into town alone. He wore his cleanest shirt, brought every letter of reference he could find, and carried a hand-stitched envelope with the children's names, written by June in her careful looping handwriting. When he walked into the courthouse, the clerk asked, "Are you the father?" Thomas paused, then said clearly, "I will be. I just need the law to catch up." Back at the ranch, June waited by the window all day. When the sun started to drop and hooves finally crunched the frozen path, she raced outside, breath clouding in front of her. Thomas swung off his horse, handed her a folded paper. She unfolded it with shaking fingers. A single tear fell, then two. "They said yes?" she whispered. "They said yes." He barely finished the words before June wrapped her arms around him, this time tighter, this time trembling. "They're ours?" she said. "They've always been." And that night, as snow fell quiet across the land, the Callahan house stayed lit longer than usual. Because in a world where names could be taken and homes could vanish overnight, 7 children and 1 strong woman had finally found something no one could take away: a family. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted in patches. reluctant to let go of the quiet it brought. But beneath the frost, the earth softened. Shoots of green began to peek through the ground. The wind turned warmer, and with it came a new beginning, not just for the land, but for the Callahan family. Yes, they called themselves that now. Not because the law said they could, but because they chose to. June stood barefoot in the grass behind the house, watching Ellie and Matthew try to teach Nate how to run without falling. He stumbled forward on chubby legs, laughter bubbling from him like a song. Nearby, Ruthie hung fresh laundry, humming under her breath. It was just another day, but to June it was everything she'd ever dreamed and never dared to ask for. Inside, Thomas was fixing the frame of a door again. Samuel had gotten a little too excited with the toy rifle and knocked it loose. Susie was helping him sand the rough edges. "You know," Susie said as she handed him the hammer, "you're like a real dad now." Thomas gave a soft chuckle. "You think so?" She nodded. "You fuss over stuff, you fix things, you worry when we're quiet too long." He smiled. "Sounds about right." "And June likes you," she added, eyes sly. Thomas paused in mid-swing, then cleared his throat. "Don't suppose that's a secret anymore," he muttered. Susie giggled. That night, June and Thomas sat on the porch beneath a sky full of stars. The air was cool, the kind that carried promise. Thomas turned toward her. "Been thinkin'. Dangerous habit," she teased. He smiled. "I want to build another room. Bigger one. For the little ones. Maybe a new stove. I figure if we're gonna keep growin'." June raised an eyebrow. "Growin'?" He looked at her carefully. "I meant as a family." Her expression softened. "You sure about that?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." June hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded family record, creased and worn. "This was all we had," she said, laying it on the porch railing. "No names, no proof, just each other." Thomas touched the edge of the paper. "Now you've got more." She looked at him, eyes glassy. "We've got you." Weeks passed. The ranch became more than a place. It became a rhythm. Fences mended, horses shoed, dinners shared, fights had and forgiven. Lessons taught by lantern light. Prayers whispered in tired voices. And one clear morning, as birds began to return and calves took their first shaky steps, Thomas walked down the path in his Sunday best. June met him by the fence, hair pinned, shawl across her shoulders. "You look nervous," she said. "I'm not," he replied, then paused. "Maybe a little." She grinned. "Don't worry, I say yes." He blinked. "I didn't even ask yet." "You didn't have to." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small velvet pouch, and handed it to her. Inside wasn't a ring, yet. Just a circle of braided leather, soft and warm. "It's not much," he said. June wrapped it around her wrist. "It's everything." That afternoon, the children gathered flowers from the edge of the pasture, built a garland, and placed it on the porch steps where Thomas and June stood, hands clasped, hearts full. No preacher, no guests, just sky, wind, and the sound of laughter. They didn't need anything else, and in the years that followed, people passing by the Callahan Ranch would often ask about the noise, the laughter, the children who ran like they owned the land. "They do," Thomas would say. "They earned every inch."